Okay, welcome back. This is week 3, unit 3, and if you've just been watching videos, you've been watching art historical videos about Greece and about the classical period in Greece, and that leads to quite neatly to us talking about sculpture. And so, in terms of talking about sculpture, this particular lecture is a pretty simple structure. The three main parts. The first part, we're going to be talking about the three different ways of making sculpture, like the additive, reductive, and indirect, and kind of explaining each of those. Then part 2, we're going to be talking about the issue of space and the different ways that sculptures engage space and the degree that they engage space. So we basically explain the difference between different types of relief sculpture and different types of freestanding sculpture, and the difference between those things. And then the last part, just talk about some more modern and contemporary examples and kind of pushing the boundaries of what is sculpture. But let's start with what are the ways that sculptures are made. So sculpture is generally any kind of three-dimensional work that is meant to be displayed, and usually, to be a work of sculpture, it shouldn't have any kind of utilitarian purpose other than being a piece of sculpture. But any kind of material, so ceramics could be used, any kind of material could be used to make sculpture. So in general, additive is a major way that sculpture pieces can be made, and that could be through molding and like such as working with clay, or through just constructing and building, such as using wood, or any kind of assemblage. Some types of assemblage involve putting sculpture works together with just lots of different kind of materials, almost like a three-dimensional version of collage. But all of these examples that we have here, they're all made by various additive processes, whether it's by molding or by constructing and assembling. Okay. Another major way that sculpture could be made is through reductive means. So when we think of sculpture, we generally think of carving, like stone carving, and that would be an example of reductive sculpture, where the only way that the artist can make it is to have to remove material. And there's no going back because it's reductive. If you remove too much, then you have basically ruined the piece, or you have to change your idea as to what kind of piece you're going to use. And so a lot of reductive sculpture is with stones, such as marble or limestone, or like the Egyptians liked hard materials like diorite. But also a lot of it is out of soft materials, such as wood or plaster. Now the most complicated, and also in some ways one of the most important ways of making a three-dimensional work of sculpture, is by casting. Casting is an indirect form of construction, where instead of making the work itself, what the artist does is the artist makes a mold that then will materials be poured into that mold, and then will set inside that mold. Most casting is done with metals, and that means that this has to be a pretty intense and dangerous kind of operation, where you have to design a mold to hold molten, whether it's bronze or molten, let's try to think of another example, molten copper or silver, and so that's pretty intense. But there are other things you can use to make indirect sculpture with, such as you could use plastics, or plaster, or ceramics for that matter, or resins. So the way to make a sculpture in the indirect process, there are a number of different ones, but the one that we're going to focus on primarily is what's called the lost wax method, because this was the method that was kind of developed in antiquity, in the classical period, and was extremely influential in the Renaissance period. And So we're going to go through some of the basic process. So to start with, in the indirect process, the artist has to make a model, has to make a work of sculpture that is basically the same scale as the piece that they want to make in the final version. The only difference is of the model, it doesn't have to be of permanent material. The model could be made out of clay or of different kind of armatures with clay or with plaster around it. And then from the model, the artist then makes a plaster cast of the model. Like you can see here, the artist is making casts of lots of different parts of the model, and then they're all going to be assembled together. And one way that this is done is where between the stage of the model and then the cast, the artist then covers the entire model with a layer of wax, and then the mold is pressed directly into the wax. That is one way, but from there, like you can see here, you then, once you have the cast, the cast is the outside, but then we also have to make an inside cast, right? So we make a wax cast and then make the inside cast, and then down here, this final stage, when the whole cast is made together, then you fill it again with wax, right? And you put the outside cast and the inside cast together, and then you pour the molten metal, probably bronze, and the bronze, right, because it's really, really hot, is going to seep through all of these channels, right, all these spaces, and it's going to pour out. You just can heat up the wax, and then the wax is going to come pouring out. Usually there's a channel somewhere down here. Whoop, I have to go back. There's a channel for the wax to come out of. And then when it's all said and done, you have to work on, you still have a lot of work to do. You have to clean up the bronze, but basically you now have a bronze work of sculpture. Okay, I'm going to end the lecture there, or end the first part. Next part we'll start talking about the difference between relief sculpture and freestanding.